Thank you for joining us for the Presidential Global Game Changers panel online, Turning Intentions into Reality, Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace, presented by the Rensselaer New England Executive Council. Please make sure your volume is turned up. You will be muted throughout the presentation out of respect to our presenters. We received some questions during the registration process, which we will get to during the Q&A portion of the program as time allows. I am now pleased to introduce our host for today's discussion. Ms. Catherine Murtaugh, Esquire, of the class of 1987, is Chair of the Rensselaer New England Executive Council, Trustee at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and Chief Compliance Officer and Managing Director for Sustainable Investing at Harvard Management Company, Incorporated, a subsidiary of Harvard University. Welcome, Ms. Murtaugh.
Thank you, Deirdre. Hello, thank you all for joining us today. Each Presidential Global Game Changers panel is presented by one of our regional executive councils located in key geographic areas where there are engaged alumni, alumnae, and parents. These councils, located in Silicon Valley, Greater New York, the Texas Triangle, the Capital Region, and of course, New England, were created to strengthen connections and offer opportunities for engagement within our communities. While these engagements have changed from in-person to virtual over the past year, we hope and plan to bring back in-person opportunities in the near future. However, we remain dedicated to continuing to present thought leadership discussions featuring topics of emerging global importance with alumni and faculty innovators in business, intellectual discovery, and entrepreneurship. Today's conversation is presented by the Rensselaer New England Executive Council, where nearly 35,000 alumni, alumnae, and parents call home. I am so grateful for my Rensselaer experience and how it prepared me for my career. The Rensselaer Annual Fund has helped generations of students gain access to the world-class education that we all experienced. Please consider joining me in supporting the Annual Fund so that future generations of students can have their own Rensselaer experience that will prepare them to join our global networks of leaders in science, technology, and innovation. More details on how you can help will be shared at the end of today's session. Thank you all in advance for your support. Now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing the Honorable Dr. Shirley Ann Jackson as the moderator of today's conversation. As a result of Dr. Jackson's strategic leadership since her arrival in 1999, she has had numerous accomplishments that have truly transformed the Institute. To name a few, successfully completing a $1.4 billion capital campaign and currently leading the second, where we have already surpassed the halfway mark toward our $1 billion goal, and the Institute's endowment has surpassed the $1 billion mark. Truly transforming the student experience by envisioning the award-winning concept of class, clustered learning, advocacy, and support for students, and bringing it to life. Receiving numerous national and international awards, including the National Medal of Science, the United States' highest honor for achievement in science and engineering. Most recently, the American Association of Physics Teachers announced Dr. Jackson as the 2021 recipient of the prestigious Hans Christian Ørsted Medal, which recognizes her exceptional contributions to physics education, and the use of science in public policy. Representing Rensselaer across the globe through participation in international events such as the World Economic Forum and truly elevating the global presence of the Institute. And most recently, leading the Institute through a global pandemic and unprecedented times with the safety of our students, faculty, and staff on campus as the absolute priority, resulting in one of the lowest infection rates in the nation. Please welcome the 18th president of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, the Honorable Dr. Shirley Ann Jackson.
Thank you so much, Kate. First, let me just say I am very grateful to the Rensselaer New England Executive Council for sponsoring this edition of our Presidential Global Game Changers panels. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by 3 business leaders and members of our community who will help us to consider how to turn intention in diversifying American businesses into reality. The business case for diverse leadership teams in terms of profitability, performance, and governance grows ever stronger. For example, the third McKinsey report on this subject found that large companies with gender diverse leadership teams were 25% more likely to outperform their national industry median in terms of profitability. And those with ethnically and culturally diverse leadership teams were 36% more likely to outperform. Yet, there are proportionately fewer women, racial and ethnic minorities, and LGBTQ plus leaders in American businesses. Although women have been earning more bachelor's degrees than men for 40 years now, they represent just 8% of Fortune 500 CEOs. And there are just 5 African-American Fortune 500 CEOs, soon to be 4, as Kenneth Frazier of Merck steps down this month, and just 2 African-American women, Roz Brewer of Walgreens Boots Alliance and Thasunda Brown Duckett of TIAA. Now, there are just 4 openly LGBTQ plus leaders of Fortune 500 companies as well. So minorities and women are underrepresented, not only there, but on boards of directors as well. A recent Crunchbase report found that among the best funded private companies, those most likely to go public in short order, nearly half had not one woman on their boards. This glacial pace of progress has drawn the attention of both regulators and key players in the capital markets. Asset managers such as State Street and BlackRock have been using their influence to insist that diversity is an important consideration in investment and to demand transparency from public companies. Last year, Goldman Sachs decided that it would no longer underwrite initial public offerings for companies that did not have at least one diverse director. NASDAQ has proposed a new rule that set a diversity objective for listed companies with more than 5 directors expected to have at least one woman director and one who self-identifies either as an underrepresented minority or LGBTQ+. And the state of California now requires public corporations headquartered there to have minimum numbers of underrepresented directors. So today, our 3 business leaders will talk with us about additional ways to engineer progress. Let me introduce them to you. Our first guest is Dr. Navid Hussein of the class of 1989, Chief Technology Officer of the Boeing Company, and Vice President and General Manager of Boeing Research and Technology. Named to this position in 2018, Dr. Hussein leads a team of scientists and engineers who collaborate with partners worldwide to address the great challenges in aerospace. Dr. Hussein holds 7 patents and joined Boeing as a Howard Hughes Doctoral Fellow in 1990. Dr. Hussein is a member of the Dean's Leadership Council at our School of Engineering. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and his master's and doctorate in the same field at Stanford University. He also holds an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Hussein, we are so glad that you could join us. Our second panelist is Ms. Christine Miller of the class of 1997, who was appointed Chief Executive Officer and Board Director of Malenta Therapeutics in August of 2020. She has more than 20 years of experience in the pharmaceuticals and life sciences industry. Most recently, she led the global product portfolio for Sandoz, a $10 billion division of Novartis, which she moved towards rapid growth and higher margin segments while continuing to build its branded generics business. Ms. Miller holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and earned an MBA and a master's degree in Technology Management from the Stevens Institute of Technology. Ms. Miller, we are delighted to welcome you as well. Our third panelist is Mr. Matt Paskey of the class of 1985, the Chief Executive Officer of Trillium Asset Management and a portfolio manager on the Trillium Sustainable Opportunities Strategy and the Trillium ESG Global Equity Strategy. He began his career at Lehman Brothers in 1984 as a technology analyst. By 1989, he already was incorporating environmental, social, and governance, or ESG factors, into his research on emerging growth companies. A true pioneer who was the first sell-side analyst in the United States to publish on the subject of socially responsible investing. Mr. Paskey holds a Bachelor of Science degree in economics from the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and is a chartered financial analyst. Mr. Paskey, we are very delighted to have you with us today as well. So now let us begin. And I'll start with you, Mr. Paskey. In September of 2020, Commissioner Allison Herron-Lee of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, pointed out the limitations of principles-based disclosure requirements surrounding diversity and inclusion. 72% of the companies in the Russell 1000 did not disclose any racial or ethnic data about their employees, and just 4% disclosed the complete information that they must maintain under U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission requirements. Fewer than half of Fortune 100 companies disclosed the gender and ethnic compositions of their boards. So it is not clear that the new SEC disclosure requirements regarding material human capital measures or objectives, which took effect at the end of last year, will yield more uniform reporting. So could you tell us a bit about how important transparency is about diversity and inclusion, and what, in your view, should the rules or the approach be in this arena?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for that question and the opportunity to be here on this call today. We know from all of the data that there are a lot of material factors that are non-financial, environmental, social, governance factors that drive performance and sustainability of business models. And when we look at that broad range, how a company, basically we can all agree without there being any controversy that a main driver of performance is quality of management. And what I would sort of attest is that one of the clearest markers of quality of management is how a management team addresses both environmental, social, governance, and disclosing that information, including, of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we need is, yes, standardization of the data that's being released, and what it really does is help us in determining the highest quality management teams in each sector, and therefore, that is able to help us with delivering better than market performance.
So speaking of data, Dr. Hussein, in 2021, Boeing released its first diversity and inclusion report, and your CEO, Chief Executive Officer David Calhoun, has been frank about the need for improvement. So can you tell us why making such data public is valuable to the company?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Jackson, and for the opportunity to be on this panel with you and my fellow panelists. So we have been very determined in our efforts at Boeing to confront inequity. And one of the things in that journey and the steps that we're taking is we're committing to this transparency that David Calhoun mentioned. And we published, as you mentioned, these diversity metrics for the first time in our company's in history, and includes data on gender and race, as well as our near-term aspirations. And I think, frankly, one of the most important things in there also is the actions that we're taking as we strive to achieve these aspirations. And we take this kind of step with extreme amount of humility because we're not satisfied with the current levels of representation in our workforce or frankly in our industry. So by sharing this progress today and every year going forward, this is a step in that'll help hold us accountable to achieve these goals that we've set forth.
Well, let me ask a follow-on question to you, Dr. Hussein. Does Boeing believe that it leads to better decision-making? And given that Boeing is truly a global multinational company, does diverse representation at all levels play into that as well?
Absolutely. I'll sort of take the global nature of our business, if I may, first. So we serve marketplaces really all across the globe, and these teams that we have, the stakeholders that we serve, are diverse people in almost every regard. And we've set up business resource groups outside the United States. We've hired diversity and inclusion leaders in places like India, Singapore, the United Arab Emirates. These local leaders find ways to promote diversity and inclusion with a local mindset, as well as taking into account our company's values. So these are, as a global multinational company, is of utmost importance for us to treat all of our stakeholders with respect and humility, and as well as each other as employees of Boeing.
There's a business case, there's an inspirational case, and there's a modeling case that you provide, I should say, as you go abroad. So speaking of context, Ms. Miller, is quantitative data enough to ensure that companies are offering equality of opportunity? I know you've thought about this, about whether we need context as well.
So data is important, but we definitely need context. We need to know where we stand as companies, right? But we also need to know where we want to go and what does good look like for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this ideally should be done at an industry level so that there's alignment on what good looks like and how it should be measured. I have the privilege of being an advisory board member of the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association, and the HBA's core mission is to achieve gender parity in healthcare. It's made up of almost 11,000 members actually, and 170 corporate partners. And there have been 16 actually of these companies that have come together to form a gender parity collaborative. And this collaborative's focus is establishing what good looks like in the industry. Also to come together to develop strategies and manage performance. And we've really seen an acceleration of parity or equity and inclusion in healthcare as a result of these efforts. So I definitely think it's important, but you need the context.
And I'm sure that the current COVID crisis we're still in the throes of, but are hopefully coming out of, at least in this country, actually shows how important that context is, does it not?
Absolutely. And we actually have seen, I was on a call this morning actually about this topic where we've actually seen a number of women exit the workforce as a relation to COVID. So it is really important to put a focus on this topic and having the data to support it.
As well as access, equity and access.
Absolutely.
Right? So Mr. Patsky, let me come back to you for a moment. What are investors? Because you know a lot about that community, obviously. What are investors hoping to see, and what do they expect in terms of diversity and inclusion, really?
It's important to recognize that the problems obviously are system-wide, and nobody is expecting any company to show up as perfect. And I have yet to meet a perfect person, and I've been yet to find a perfect company when I'm looking for investment opportunities. What we're looking for is data, sort of recognition. And by the way, we should start off by acknowledging there was a question that came in before this panel on diversity and what does that mean? And I'm like, diversity is broader than gender, race, sexual orientation, right? We acknowledge that it includes a lot of other factors. And so, socioeconomic background of who you recruit and grow in your organization, physical disabilities, all sorts of factors are there in terms of trying to look at what you mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what we're really hoping for from companies is transparency and consistency of data so that we can actually look at how much progress they're making. Because what I really want to see is that they've identified the reality of this is an issue. We happen to live in a society that we know has sexism and racism are real, and we see it in all facets of society. We want to see, how are you as a management team addressing that, and what steps have you taken to address it within your recruiting and retention of employees, and particularly who's rising in the ranks and being promoted. And we can see that if you are giving us consistent disclosure, and then we can watch that progress. And that's what we're really looking for from companies, is to see steady progress.
Speaking of progress of another type, Ms. Miller, LeanIn.org and McKinsey have been conducting a large annual study on women in U.S. workplaces for 6 years now. And they've described a quote unquote broken rung phenomenon, the point at which women are disadvantaged, which is the first step up to manager, when men are more likely to be promoted than women in general, and minority women in particular. As a result, women hold just 38% of manager positions, while men hold obviously 62%, which then has repercussions throughout their careers. So is the broken rung something that you have observed?
Yes, I have observed it, and I have, it hits home to me personally, being a woman, especially a woman of color. And it really comes down to the fact that women face a great deal of obstacles during their career for advancing their career. I've had many obstacles myself. I mean, I can give you examples of going out on maternity leave and someone assuming I wasn't coming back after having children. And so being passed up for opportunities because people make assumptions about what it is that I want from my career versus actually asking me. So I've learned to be very vocal about saying what I want to do with my career and not shying away from that. But not everyone has the same opportunities or have the same voice. And so it definitely is something real. We see similar, if I delve down right into the healthcare industry, we see similar data because McKinsey has it by from an industry point of view. And we talk about STEM and STEM related careers. You have a lot of STEM career opportunities in healthcare, and you see that women make up 66% of the workforce in healthcare at entry level. But by the C-suite, they only make up 30%, with that steepest decrease being in that manager to senior manager level. So it is a real thing. I know that the women that I started off with at the beginning of my career, and many of them have stepped away for various reasons, but typically because of how difficult it is to actually advance their career, and they become disillusioned and they find other opportunities.
It's almost like an oxymoron, because you know, as we've observed here, and many times women are graduating at a higher rate. But then you see the drop off that you mentioned as women, not necessarily our graduates, but I'm talking more globally, you know, as women move along in their careers. Now, let me ask you this quick follow on. It's not such a quick answer, I'm sure. But of all the groups in our society in recent years, it has been minority women who have been starting their own businesses at the most robust rate. Does this surprise you?
Not surprised at all. And not in the least. Why? Because the same data that I just shared, especially in healthcare, for women representation and that drop off, it's even worse for women of color. So the entry level representation in healthcare is 20% women of color, but by the time they get to the C-suite, their share drops to only 5%, which is massive, right? And you see that same steep decline for women of color happening at that manager to senior manager level. And these women know that they have potential. They just don't see that potential being fulfilled in corporate America. There are constructs, right? Old constructs around what a leader is supposed to look like, right? I have to say, I'm not that construct, right? There are certain boxes that people expect you to check, and this can be difficult to achieve when you're up against a lot of the obstacles in corporate America. So the fact that you see more women of color starting their own businesses isn't surprising, because the data that we have suggests that they're going to go somewhere if they're not in corporate America.
So Mr. Patsky, there's a different kind of a broken rung phenomenon, and it links to this, that startups led by women received just 2.3% of venture capital funding in 2020. And so how much, in your view, are women entrepreneurs disadvantaged by a lack of access to venture capital? That's a critical step for those who would start their own businesses. And how much do you think venture capitalists themselves may be disadvantaged by perhaps unconscious bias?
Yeah, the unconscious bias in the VC world is incredibly strong, and white men make up 31% of the U.S. population. They receive over 96% of venture funding, venture dollars. Now, that is sort of a staggering distortion, and it speaks to a substantial investment opportunity if you focus on investing in businesses led by women and people of color. But that certainly is slow to be recognized by the old boys network of the venture capital world. But it does present opportunity for those of us who are focused on that disconnect, right? There is no way anyone reasonable could tell me that 96% plus of good ideas are coming from white men. So something's wrong, and it does create an opportunity, if you're looking at it the other way, of I want to be where it's not crowded, where there's not a lot of people chasing opportunity, and therefore I'm able to make more investments without a lot of competition in investing in ventures that are led by women and people of color.
So we've been talking about culture, and it has many contexts. But Dr. Hussein, how important is culture? In this kind of discussion, and it has. I realize that there are many elements of what we mean by culture.
Yeah, Dr. Jackson, when we think about culture, when we think about our values, it becomes the air that we breathe, and it informs how we act and operate, and sometimes it's defined by what you tolerate. And so when we think about the importance of culture, we are trying to build on the strong foundation that we have. You know, we've been thinking about our values since we first built airplanes in 1916, you know, and we continue to look and examine at these values, pressure test, and find ways to, the best way to sort of to bring values into your company is to model them. And when we think about leadership in our company, people who advance at Boeing are those people that are modeling our values.
So we talk a lot about the idea of a glass ceiling, but some people have spoken of a glass cliff. It's interesting. In other words, that women and folks from any underrepresented group tend to be given opportunity to lead in moments when an organization is in crisis or at least the need of great change, when success is far from guaranteed, and therefore in taking it on, it's like jumping off the cliff, but not knowing, you know, what the landing plane may look like, or and certainly maybe without a bungee cord, much less a parachute. And even as I look back on my own leadership roles, I was actually asked to take on the chairship of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or the NRC, at a moment of grave public doubt about the safety of nuclear power. This was not that long after the Chernobyl disaster. And within 6 months of my becoming chairman, the NRC was on the cover story on Time magazine, one called "Blowing the Whistle on Nuclear Safety." I invite you to go look it up. And so it occasioned a lot of change that you know, had to be brought about, and I had to think, what have I gotten myself into? But and of course, in addition to public distrust, there was a split relative to our political leadership. And so one had to find the river that ran through it, hope one would land when one came off the cliff in the water and not on the cliff. And even when I came here, the board was explicit about seeking a change agent, a person that would bring some change to this great institution, which meant that one was going to run into some buzzsaws, which, you know, I did, but I'm here. So, and we've had great success and built on a great legacy here. And so, you know, let me talk to each of you about that, but let me start with you, Ms. Miller, that, you know, you were asked to serve as CEO of Malenta Therapeutics after a bankruptcy. And Malenta is in the life-saving but sometimes challenging business of commercializing antibiotics. And so, you know, there's always that two-edged sword. So give us a little bit of your thoughts about the glass cliff.
Well, thank you. I find the glass cliff phenomenon interesting because I do think that there is some truth to the idea that women get the tough assignments. I actually have built my career on tackling tough business problems.
So have I.
Yes, I'm a purpose-driven person, and my purpose in life is to help people live better lives through solving problems. So anytime there's a tough business problem, I have to say I'm a bit intrigued, and I want to come up with strategies to solve those problems. I was able to build my credibility and reputation for solving big problems and for transforming businesses as a result of it. Now, the antibiotic industry is definitely a very difficult one, simply because the reimbursement system that's set up in this country essentially disincentivizes the use of innovative antibiotics. And this is unfortunate because it results in higher mortality rates for patients, which quite frankly could be avoided. And it has a disproportionate impact on underrepresented communities and minorities. And so when I heard about this opportunity, because I spent some time in the antibiotic space in the past, I became immediately intrigued. We're actually backed by Deerfield Management, a private equity firm. And I joined the company during the pandemic, so even more excited. I joined in August of 2020, following the restructuring. And my focus has really been on leading the transformation of Malenta. And you mentioned culture earlier. This is a big focus for us. We're really taking this opportunity to reimagine our business, its mission, its vision, culture, broadening our therapeutic focus as a company so that we can build a sustainable business model, which drives both growth and profitability. Now, the amazing thing, right, about this opportunity is I tell my team that when we turn this business around, and it's already happening, it's going to be legendary. So while people may look at this as a glass cliff, I only see upside to where the company's heading. So
You have to do that.
Really fantastic.
Well, I remember something that Tom Friedman said. Thomas Friedman, you know, the great writer and editorials and so forth, and wrote "The World is Flat." We had him here. We gave him an honorary degree, and he says you can see the world, the glass is half empty or half full, and he prefers to look at it as half full. And when you're short, it's easier to look at it that way, and that's what I'm saying. Now, let me turn to Mr. Patsky and Dr. Hussein. You know, many times women, minorities, or anyone from a disadvantaged background, but particularly women and minorities, feel they have to work harder to prove themselves. And so should they make a point of taking on risky and difficult assignments, so-called rescue missions like the ones that Ms. Miller has talked about, or even what I talked about at the NRC, in order to move into leadership? Do you think that's the way to go?
You know, I'll start if I may. You know, I think that let me, if I may, let me actually first start with just some of the actions that we're taking, you know, to address these gaps, so that we don't necessarily have to think about even the rescue mission per se.
Okay.
But when we think about strengthening the equity in talent selection, ensuring diverse panels, ensuring diverse slates of candidates, enhancing benefits to advance health and wellness and safety, and the needs of all of our workforce, from childcare to members of the LGBTQ plus community. And I think, if I may speak personally to the point about a rescue mission, and I share many of the thoughts. I'm so inspired by Ms. Miller. You know, for me, I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, there's no growth in the comfort zone, as they say, you know, and there's no comfort in the growth zone, you know, and I sometimes, you know, if an assignment is feeling too easy for me, it's time to change. It's time to get a new one, you know, and frankly, you know, you have a good boss when they have your back when you fail, and frankly, not that to be negative, you know, but sometimes you fail, and that means you're taking on the hard stuff, and that's a good thing.
Mr. Patsky.
Yeah, I would just say, for certainly anyone in a career path, and certainly true in my experiences with people I've worked with, women and people of color in particular, there has been a dedication to sort of working harder to prove themselves. I've seen that repeatedly in my career, and certainly in the firm I work with now, where over half of our investment professionals are women. That is, you know, evident in the employee base. In my own career, that is where I've seen the most opportunity, is to jump in where everyone else is running the other way, right? When the problem is obvious, and no one else wants to take that role, if you raise your hand and jump in, that's an opportunity to turn things around. I've now turned 2 investment firms around, and you know, and that's led me to have a reputation of somebody who can turn around a struggling investment firm, which is a nice reputation to have. And so, but yeah, so I certainly would just say this. I think it's true for everyone that jumping in, and certainly there is, I've seen more willingness of women and people of color raising their hand to make that leap.
I think I'm talking with 3 change agents, and obviously 3 people who, you know, jumped in and certainly willing to lead through crisis. And my own philosophy is, and I say it, I didn't make up this terminology, but if you want to run with the big dogs, you have to come down off the porch, meaning you have to get in the game, even if it's a tough one. But if you're not leading the pack, the scene never changes. And so, you know, you have to move on along. So all of you are Rensselaer alums, and your, you know, first degrees, I'd say your fundamental degrees came from the great Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. So what advice, and I'm going to start you, Ms. Miller, but I would like to hear from each of you. What advice would you offer our students and our younger alums and alumni and alumnae who hope to rise into the C-suite? Ms. Miller.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I think first you need to know what motivates you. You know, what is your purpose? And if you stay true to this, I believe you will always be successful and you'll be able to rise as far as you want to. And why that's important is because you're going to need to be discerning in your career. You're not going to, you know, be in a good position if you say yes to everything. Sometimes you have to say no, right? Last year, I made the decision to leave the comfort zone of where I was at my former employer. I left with no job. I literally said, I didn't feel like that's where I was being called to be. I felt I was being called to be in leadership in a more robust way. And so I stepped out and left in February, and then there was a pandemic. Right afterwards. And I thought I was going to be a virtual school mom for some time until I got the call in April about this amazing opportunity. So I would say you have to be discerning. You have to know what really drives you, and surround yourself with a village of people who can support you. You know, mentors are great. They're the people that you need to have that can hold up the mirror to you, that can give you advice and be a sounding board and help you to define where you should be headed. But you also need sponsorship. And this is something that especially women and people of color are not necessarily aware of, that you need to have people who they have a seat at the table where the decisions are being made around career advancement and opportunity. And you need to link with those people and get their support to advocate for you with their influence when they're at that table. That is so important. I have sponsors that I have kept with me through my career that I can call them at any time to say, hey, I need you to speak to so-and-so on my behalf. So critical that you set up that network for yourself and be willing to say what you want. This is really important, especially for women. You are ready now for that thing that you want to have. You do not have to say, well, maybe if I did this, and this, and this, right?
Let me hear from Dr. Hussein and Mr. Patsky as well. Dr. Hussein?
Yes, thank you. I'll just add on to what Ms. Miller said, which was just so right on. But one of the hardest things to do, and I think one of the most desirable things for a leader, is leading change in an inspiring kind of way. And I think the only way to learn how to do that is by doing. So whatever job you're in, you can make it bigger. You can think about ways to do more. And this leading of change is extremely hard. I find it to be the hardest assignments I have ever had. We talked about turnaround amongst the panel. And unfortunately, there's no a short course, there's not a Cliff Notes version of this. You learn it by the mistakes, frankly, that you're going to make. But dive in, get into the arena. As Dr. Jackson said, come off the porch, learn by doing, and take those risks. And one more thing, if I may, sometimes it is tempting to keep thinking about 2 or 3 jobs in the future. Focus on the job that you're in. Do a great job, in the job that you're in, and the success will kind of be in your wake.
Great. To say, my father used to always say to me, the way to get your next best job is to do as well as you can in the one you're in. Mr. Patsky.
Yeah, I would just add, you want to be fearless and confident, and it is true. Go and see opportunities beyond the scope of the work you have, and jump in and volunteer and do more. And that is how you become a success. And nobody gets through RPI without being exceptional. And when you get into the workforce, that's going to be recognized. And I, to this was just blown away when I landed in Lehman, having everybody immediately call me the computer expert, the IT expert. I was, from an undergraduate degree in economics, but I did know more about computers and programming and technology than almost anyone else in the equity research department of Lehman, which is frightening to think about in context, but that was true in 1984. And it's true right now for a graduate of RPI. They're going in better trained for most roles than a lot of other schools. And that is going to be incredibly helpful, not just in the start of your career, but through your entire career.
That's why the confidence that Ms. Miller talked about is so important as well. And so I'm going to then, you anticipated my next question, but I'm going to ask you to give me a yes or a no. I think I know the answer anyway. RPI prepared you well then for where you've gone in your careers?
Yeah, I mean, certainly yes for me, yes. And I feel, yeah, I've answered. I think I answered that, but yeah, and I'm thankful that that I ended up choosing to go to RPI.
Well, thank you. That's great to hear. Dr. Hussein?
Yeah, if I could add on, it's an absolute yes, not just because I'm on this panel with you, Dr. Jackson, but because frankly, it's those fundamentals that people had the patience to teach me and to spend time with me after class, and in the evening sometimes, where the professors are not with their families, but they stayed to explain something past office hours. I remember that so vividly, and I'm so grateful for it. And frankly, there's a piece of this that's the process around training, and I felt it in that RPI took that very seriously, from the tools that we use in our education, the focus again on the fundamentals first, before we start adding layers of complexity, and that has stayed with me. It just like you said, it's the primary degree that's been on my path. So I'm very grateful for it.
And Ms. Miller, the same for you, but I'm going to ask you to be succinct because there are 2 questions from the audience that I think we have to get to. Yes,
yeah,
please.
well, I definitely think that my degree from Rensselaer has been essential to my success because it taught me how the process for problem solving and how to be a strategic thinker. And that's essential for a role like mine. So definitely grateful.
Okay, so let me ask you a question that is a little more frightened, you could say, but it's one that I think people worry about. And it goes this way. It seems that diversity is defined as women and racial, ethnic, and LGBTQ minorities. How about some discussion on the need for diversity of skill sets, backgrounds, etc., as opposed to the identity politics that has taken over academia and is on the way to taking over corporate America? So what would you say about that, Mr. Patsky? I'll ask you first.
I agree. Diversity is much broader, and I think I'll just say this: I take great pride in the fact that myself, my chief operating officer, and my chief investment officer are all the first-time college graduates in our families. None of us came from, we all came from a blue-collar working class background, and that I think matters, and I think it actually affects how we handle interacting with other people and decision making. And every aspect of that, including diversity of opinion on political issues, is important to try to make sure that that's been included and you've been thoughtful about it as you're having discussions. So I think it is true when we think about diversity and inclusion, we want to be much broader in the way we think about it. And so I certainly when we're talking to companies, we are asking them to be broader in the way they think about it, and not just limit it to gender, race, sexual orientation.
Miller?
Yeah, definitely diversity is a broad topic, but I do believe that companies and organizations need to focus on having specifics around women, race, ethnic, and LGBTQ, because if it's not, it gets lost in the discussion. And I have been a part of organizations that just look at diversity more broadly, and you can end up having a room full of people that essentially look the same, but maybe from different countries. That's not true diversity. So I think you have to have both, right? And I think that's really important to recognize.
Yeah, I would just add that, yes, I definitely think it's an and it's really, when we think about skill sets, to give you an example, we have been hiring certain folks and key individuals to work on software technology, some of whom have had a very non-traditional path in their training, may even not have a sort of a 4-year degree in some cases. Just as an example, I know it's just one small nit, but it's an and, around what we've been talking about on this panel and all the other forms of diversity.
As a university president, I would have to speak to this question about identity politics taking over academia, and it has not, and certainly not here. Everyone comes here with their own lived experience, and everyone wishes to have who they are respected. And everyone is working, people are brilliant, and they work very hard to prepare themselves for the kinds of careers that you all have. And the ability to create community within that context is a challenge, but it is very important. And I would say that on average, Rensselaer is really good in that way. And so people here are about, whether they can design the next aircraft or help us win in aerospace. They're about, how do we create investment strategies for supporting new businesses. They're looking at what breakthroughs when they leave here, can make in areas such as biotechnology and the life sciences, or wherever they choose to focus their careers. And so people here want to get things done and they want to make a difference. Having said that, they live in a world that is diverse and a country that is diverse. And number one, as a leader, I operate from the realization that talent is everywhere. And we have to draw from the complete talent pool if we want to educate people who have the talent and motivation and focus to go out and be successes. And we have to educate the complete talent pool if we want to deal with the challenges that we face as a country and as we look to make our mark on the world. And so that is the position we have. And we look at having people have respect and tolerance. Not everyone's going to love everybody, but it's important that people respect each other. So let me ask those of you, because this falls in your bailiwick. Here's a question. How can you reconcile the objectives of maximizing shareholder value and returns, productivity and efficiency with non-corporate, non-financial ESG or societal goals? Whoever wants to start, I'm going to ask each one of you anyway, but Matt, I'm looking at you, so let me start with you.
I'll jump in
to first names, and you can too.
All right, I'll jump in, having done this now for over 3 decades. I'd referenced earlier in my first comments that one of the most indicative characteristics of sustainable returns for shareholders is quality of management, and that I had found one of the best markers for quality of management was the way in which a management team was addressing environmental, social, and governance issues. And I stand by that, now 37 years into my career in investments, that I don't see there being, I would agree there can be short-term disconnects, and that there may be times in which the decision needs to be made about investment spend that could be causing you to miss your near-term quarter, and therefore shareholder returns are going to look bad near term, but it's for the best interest long term, right? And I would encourage anybody at any company, whether public or not, that focusing on the long term, focusing on sustainable business models is the right decision for your career. It's the right decision for investors. And so please think long term. Please don't get caught up in the short termism of the stock market.
Yeah.
Ms. Miller?
Maybe I'll piggyback on that. So
we gotta leave at least a minute for Dr. Hussein.
Yeah, no, I piggyback on that. I think, creating sustainable business models is paramount. When you have the short-term focus, you end up losing in the end. And so having clarity around where you want to go, and having that alignment with your board and your shareholders will allow you the opportunity to do things over the long term, not just the short term.
That's interesting. That's it. Dr. Hussein.
Right. And just to quickly add, I mean, doing the right thing, is very much aligned with shareholder value to your customers and stakeholders. And just a piece of that to maybe close where I started is around transparency as well.
That's great. So several people have asked our panelists to define equity. And so I'm going to do the lightning round. What is equity to you, Dr. Hussein? What does that mean?
Equity, we call it equity for all. The word fairness tends to be something that comes to mind, but there's just so much more to it. When we think about treating people with respect, understanding degree of difficulty when we rank performance, to the points made earlier. So we call it equity for all at Boeing, and it's a central tenet.
Mr. Patsky.
Yeah, for us, it's about providing an equal opportunity for all, and obviously in a society that has problems, it leaves business in this awkward position of trying to right some of what is wrong in society. But we want to make sure that we're getting to a place and working toward a place where everyone has the same opportunity to succeed.
Yeah, I would echo my fellow panelists, right? It's about equity. Equity is about fair treatment and equal opportunity, and leveling the playing ground anywhere you can, regardless of your gender, color, sexuality.
And I think equity encompasses tapping the full talent pool by giving everyone an equal chance. That's what we're talking about. And let me just close out by, I'm losing the light because a thunderstorm is starting. But let me close out by thanking you all. What you do, what you've accomplished in your careers, Dr. Navid Hussein, Mr. Matt Patsky, and Ms. Christine Miller. You all are amazing. Very proud to have you as Rensselaer alumni and alumna. And I wish you well, and I want to thank you for taking on a difficult topic, but one that's very, very important. So thank you again, and all the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've now come to the end of our program, a very important discussion. And so I want to thank those who've been watching and listening, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Dr. Jackson, our panelists, and attendees for joining today. You will be receiving an email within the next few days with a brief survey asking for feedback on the discussion. Please let us know what you thought of this event to help us plan for future virtual events. Thank you in advance for your input. Please also follow the Rensselaer Institute Advancement YouTube channel for today's recording, along with all previous virtual event recordings, including past Rensselaer Global Game Changers panel online discussions. Finally, as Ms. Murtaugh mentioned, there are many ways you can provide support for current and future students at Rensselaer. For more details, please visit giving.rpi.edu/annual-fund. And save the date for 2R Pi Day on June 28th, a virtual event where we can support our institute and stay engaged with our community online. For more details, visit givingday.rpi.edu/2RPI. A big thank you to those who have generously supported the Institute recently. Thank you, stay safe and healthy, and have a great rest of your day.